Welcome to episode 18 of Out of Bounds, a podcast where I get my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry, and today we're talking about what does it mean to be black, and extension, what does it mean to be white? And I'm a little sick, head cold or something. I don't know. I don't usually get this sick, so bear with me if I'm struggling a little bit. But anyway, today's conversation, I would like to start off by saying I don't typically like the whole black-white discourse in America, meaning that we tend to talk about a lot of things as in black and white, not just the colors, but as in race. Whenever we're talking about racial things or topics of power or topics of oppression and privilege, a lot of times it's just white versus black, because that is the most pronounced relationship in America due to the history. And so, I typically don't, but for this conversation, it's important. It's actually a lot about that. And so when you start to talk about what is black, or what does it mean to be black, what does it mean to be white? For me, I made a departure, now it's probably been 5 or 6 years ago. And recently, like in the last year, I've made a conscious effort to no longer try to use black and white as a form of ethnicity or race, because race was created, in America, or not America, but they were created by a group to suppress people in America and other places. And that's not really why I use it, but I use that because it's not something that's real. Ethnicity and culture to me is much more real. So, understanding that, look, if you're from, Kenya, or if you're from the UK, or if you're from Los Angeles or Chicago, black just labels all of us because our skin color, but that's not indicative of how close we are. Now, look, me and my brother are very different people, or one of my brothers. But still, labeling us African American, growing up in the same place, same country, same town, like we're going to have more similarities than you calling somebody from across the world black and I'm black and just because we look black. So to me, black didn't always make sense that way. And then the same thing, well, not the same thing with white, but black is kind of when I first started to see that. And especially once I hit college and stuff and I started meeting people from, actual Africans and, realizing the difference. Cause I guess growing up, until you meet people, it is like, okay, well, you look black, so we all black, but it's not really the case. And so once I started to depart from white, also is when I had a simple kind of revelation, I guess. It's like, I'm thinking, cause for me, I grew up, throughout South Chicago and then South suburbs. And in the South suburbs, it was changing. It changed a lot. Once we got there, it was kind of still what you think of a suburb. But after Section 8 and a lot of stuff, it changed. It became like mini Chicago. And so a lot of people that was there before left, but there were still, Caucasian people that were still there. And so I just thought about this conversation of acting black or being black and all this stuff. And I'm like, you know what? My homie, he lived in the same block I did, or he got family in the same areas that I do in the city. Or like there's nights I wasn't eating. He probably had more nights he wasn't eating, or, vice versa. Or sometimes I had this and he didn't have it. Or a lot of times, I didn't have it and he might have had to spot me, whatever. And I'm like, you know what? If I could sit here in a circle and we could converse and be like, yeah, Terry Black, or, you act black, I guess. Then I'm like, how come that's not true for him when he out here going through the exact same thing we going through? And so then, that's when people are like, oh yeah, you black, or you technically black, or, you one of us. And so I started to realize that the conversation of black and white was never about really your skin color or really about your heritage. It was always about your culture. And so it was like, okay, this is more of a being black is a culture thing, because you can't, I am African American. it doesn't matter how I act. It does not matter how I act. That is what I am. And so I can't act black. And so I'm like, what is that? Or if I act a certain way, I don't become less black. Like that, it didn't make sense to me. And so I realized, like, when you hear people talk, you see it in the media and you read books and all that, what we're talking about being black and white is a culture. Like, oh, those are black movies. And a lot of times, like, again, so an African from anywhere in Africa is considered black too. And so there's a lot of movies that they have never seen that we would call black movies here in America. And so how could then they be black movies if they're not universal to all of us? And so things like that, we understand. It's like, yeah, you know what I mean by that. And it's like, I don't think you know what you mean by that. What you actually mean by that is part of the African American culture. In America, a lot of times when we're speaking of black, that's what we're talking about. Oh, they talk black or ghetto, and that's a whole thing. And then they say, okay, that's a black movie, or that's black people food, soul food, yada, yada. Soul food's a little different because, you know, that's Creole Cajun, a lot of ties to real heritage, but still, that's what black people eat. That's what black people wear. That's what black people listen to. That's a black thing. Those are conversations of culture. And so then the opposite is white. And that's when I started to realize that, okay, well, what is white? Being white is tied to a lot of cultural things, being rich, being preppy, being nerdy, being, less cool, whatever it is. And then so I really dug into it after college and realized that, look, black and white is just a conversation of privilege and, I wouldn't say exactly oppression, but lack of privilege. And I mean that by mostly socioeconomic status. And so not just the societal, you know, white privilege type thing. It's like the actual privilege of your economics. And so you always think, again, you see an African American guy and he's dressed in Abercrombie and Fitch, and you know, he's listening to rock music and he's chilling with the gamers or whatever. Traditionally back in the day, you'd be like, oh boy, he white, he ain't black. Or, you know, that's when you have somebody that's a Caucasian be like, I'm blacker than he is. And you saw that in my favorite movie, Blind Spotting, this year. You also saw it in Green Book in one of the scenes where it's like, the driver who's an Italian on the block, he can relate more to the African Americans than Dr. Shirley, who is a doctor of music and very rich. And he's like, my life is blacker than yours. And so you realize that we're talking about systems of economic wealth and privilege and people who are impoverished. And so the whole thing is like, if you ever heard of it, if you in the culture, if you're not, then you might not have heard of it, but people trying to out black each other. And it's a nice sketch with Key and Peele, did it, where they were trying to out black each other. And it's a thing that happens where it's just like, you basically try to say who had it rougher. And it's like, oh, the rougher you had it, the more messed up your childhood was or whatever, or your upbringing, then that means the blacker you are. And that's what it is ingrained in us, is that black equals poor and impoverished and ghetto. White equals successful, preppy, privileged, all these different things. And so then it comes down to not even a question about what your skin color is. It just becomes about what your lifestyle is. And so in that vein, I made the decision to, like, I don't like people calling me black. And I know people have different things on that. But my reasoning is that's not a real thing, especially not for the purposes of identity. I think that's just a conversation of culture. And so we're African American, and then there's Africans, and then of course you could break down the actual country. And then, of course, you have the Euro Africans, all these different things. And so that's kind of where I came down to it. And then I I guess the next step, which is recent to me, is that I would, and this is a bigger conversation I won't get into right now, but I would push for not only the dismantling of white and bringing it to Euro-American or Caucasian is what I like to use. I would even say we need to push further, and I would push Caucasian people further to identify their heritage. And I know there's a lot of mixture in it. A lot of people have different mixtures. That's fine. Maybe you have one that's, you could tap into more with your current relatives. Maybe you have a higher percentage of one. Maybe there's one that just speaks to you more, but hold on to something in that heritage and don't let that be lost, because again, right now, the way society uses black and white, it's a conversation of, again, lifestyle. But the reason it was created and race was created was to oppress people. And once you became part of the white, cause at one time Italians weren't considered white. At one time Irish people weren't considered white. Once you became part of the almighty white, then it was like, okay, well now you don't have to identify as your own heritage. You're all in this one big protective, because it's a lot easier to make it us versus them, black versus white, when it's just black versus white. But when it's broken down to African American, to Mexican, to Puerto Rican, to Colombian, Venezuelan, excuse me, to Italian, to Irish, to Norwegian, to Swedish, when we break it all down and we really hold on to our, like, what makes us unique, and then still respect each other as humans, it's hard to fight then. It's a lot easier to fight when it's just one big group and we all just follow, okay, I'm white, so we're going to do what the white people do. I'm black, I'm going to do what the black people do. And it's easier to get lost when you merge all those together. And so I just think one small move that could get to some progression is breaking that apart, because, whether you're a person of color or not, looking at everybody the same doesn't help. Whether it's like I'm looking at all black people the same or I'm looking at all white people as you just a white person. It's more to a person than that, of course, but even just on paper, it's more to a person than that. And so for me personally, that's what I've moved to. I like to go to Euro-American, because remember, these are people that descended from people from Europe and Caucasian and that history. Just like African American, my history is not the same as somebody who's from actual motherland Africa. And so just kind of naming it and claiming it. And that is the way I use black and white today. So anyway, that's it for me. Go down to the comment section. Let me know what you think. The whole conversation about what it means to be black. I didn't really get into a whole lot of, acting black or being too black or you acting too white or whatever. Again, to me, I think if you just look at any way that you use that, any way that people use that, what it all boils down to is just a discussion of you talking about the actions they're doing and not necessarily something that's inherent in being black. Being poor and struggling is not a birthright of being African American or anything else. Just like having money is not a birthright of you being Caucasian or Euro-American. You're really just talking about a culture. And so go to the comment section, let me know what you thought about that. Share it around, get the convo started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and until next episode.